That's how I came to the University of Houston, because Cecil was here.
He taught me about myself. He made me examine myself.
But on stage, that's where I remember, that's where his magic was.
I was totally prepared. So yeah, and that's all because of Cecil in the UH drama department, absolutely.
Good afternoon, I'm Ernie Manous, and welcome to an Afternoon with the Artists. Today we're here to celebrate the profession of acting, University of Houston's School of Theater and Dance, and the career and legacy of acting teacher and director Cecil Pickett. It is often said that the influence of a great teacher can impact our lives long after we leave school. For many, the teacher that best exemplifies that statement would be Cecil Pickett. Pickett, who earned his master's degree in drama from the University of Oklahoma, decided his passion did not lie in performing, but in teaching and directing. In the 1950s, Bel Air High School recruits Pickett to come to Houston and help build the school's fine arts program. At Bel Air, Pickett helps mold the career of Randy Quaid, Brent Spiner, Trey Wilson, and his own daughter, Cindy Pickett, creating such a strong theater program that Bel Air earns the nickname the Yale of the Southwest. In 1968, after 12 years of teaching and ready for new challenges, Pickett leaves Bel Air, eventually finding himself at the University of Houston, with the job that would truly establish his legacy and impact the world of acting. As an associate professor of drama, Pickett encounters many of his past students, plus many new and impressionable talents, such as Dennis Quaid, Brett Cullen, and Robert Wool. To this day, Pickett's pupils still credit his mentoring as a major factor in their success. Additionally, for several years, Pickett directs the Houston Shakespeare Festival, a University of Houston program started in 1975. In 1989, Pickett retires, having taught over 1,200 students. The theater community and the world at large lost Pickett in 1997, but his legacy lives on. The man once called a star maker will always be remembered for his contribution to the acting world through his teaching and his students. First, welcome to the stage from Guiding Light, we have someone you probably all know as Ferris Bueller's mom, Cindy Pickett. From The Right Stuff to Far From Heaven, from Great Balls of Fire to The Big Easy, Emmy and Golden Globe nominee Dennis Quaid. From Falcon Crest to Lost, Friday Night Lights to The West Wing, please welcome Brett Cullen. And from Bull Durham to Batman, but you probably know him best as Arliss, Robert Wool. I guess if we're going to talk about acting, the first place I want to start, since you were all taught by the same teacher, but I look at the four of you, and I wouldn't say you all have a similar style. So help people understand what it is that a fine acting coach brings to helping someone become the fine actor they are.
One of his sort of main concerns was to study with everyone and to take what works for you. And Cecil obviously had a great influence on all of us. Probably the greatest influence in my life, but there were other teachers as well. But that's why everyone has a different personality. They have their own lives, their own history to bring to the work. So I think that's what makes it a little different for each of us.
Yeah, Cecil taught acting as a craft, and I remember being in the first week of his class and having a wonderful gift of knowing what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And he took each individual person, and he always said that you are yourself, and you have to go from yourself and create the character from that. And like Brett said, he was always open-minded too, and in a way that he would say, you from any teacher that you have, you take what you can use, and cast off the rest. Well, with Cecil, he used pretty much 99.9% of what he said. And he was also taught with constructive criticism rather than just trying to build up your ego. He would tear it down.
Very constructive criticism.
He would tear you down, and then he would build you from there.
We all ran off stage crying, all the girls, at least once.
How different was it, though, to have him as your father and your acting coach?
You know what's funny? Because, I'd ride to rehearsals with him, and I'd ride back from rehearsals with him, and I kind of always wanted to have the relationship they had with him, but I felt like he might have talked more intimately with them about his life than maybe he did with me as his daughter. You know, I know I would hear things people would say that he had told them, and I thought, well, he never told me that. And you know, he kept the daughter-father relationship different. Right. And yet he was my mentor. He really had a sense of ethics about the profession, any profession, but the profession of acting. You know, I mean, you know, you hit your marks, you were on time, and he dug deep. You know, he didn't let you be lazy. You didn't let you just say the lines and hit your marks. He was brutal. He would not.
He expected you to do your homework.
He expected you to do your homework,
Right.
and if you didn't, he sent me off stage crying many times, you know, and I came back the best I could be just to show him, you know.
Yeah.
And
Robert, how about for you?
Slightly different, only in the sense that I wasn't a drama major, so I came into it later. And as anybody here who's there, I'm the last guy who should be up on, you ever thought was going to be up on the stage. So, however, the influence he had stays with me always. In fact, in comedy, and he said, what makes the unskilled eye laugh makes the skilled eye cry. And it stayed with me always, especially in comedy. Especially in comedy. Also, he was entertaining as hell. That's the other part of it. You know, it's like Simon Cowell. He'd rip you, but he's entertaining. You know, there was a point he would just tear into people, and I kind of like that. You know, and the other thing about him I always remember is that another great thing. He'd say you'd learn a lot from a great director. You can almost learn as much from a bad director. Do you remember that? He would talk about you can learn from a bad director also, which is I always thought was very interesting. He was special.
He was a good teacher. Was he also a good director? And do those two always go hand in hand?
I can't answer that because he was smart enough never to cast me. However, he did use me to write music. He knew I played piano and wrote music, to write music for the first Shakespeare Festival. That he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very good music, too.
Well, thank you.
You were in that show. It was Midsummer.
Midsummer.
Yes.
Then I will toss the question back to you then.
Okay.
Does it go hand in hand, being a good teacher and a good director?
Well, I think it's the individual, but in his case, he was an amazing teacher, but to me, his gift was working with us as students when he directed us. I mean, in class we did our scenes and but on stage, that's where I remember that's where his magic was he, you know, they used to call Bel Air High School Little Broadway because his shows were so professional and they were so good and they were magical. They were just, and his genius was directing, but he was a great teacher as well.
Dennis, what brought you into the program?
Well, at the time I was going to be a veterinarian.
How'd that work out for you?
I didn't know that.
And I used to, and Randy, my brother, was at Bel Air High School and involved in the drama department. And I used to come and watch rehearsals over there with Cecil and, you know, everybody who was there. And it started to take over me. And I started to develop a relationship kind of with Cecil. And so I followed. That's how I came to the University of Houston, because Cecil was here. He gave me, like I said, a gift. It's the luckiest experience to be 18, 19 years old and know what you want to do with the rest of your life. And I was just sort of wandering around before that. But like I said, he taught it as a craft. It was something that I could actually touch.
As a teacher, I've never met anyone who so profoundly changed my viewpoint on life, not just as an artist, but he taught me about myself. He made me examine myself. He also made me read more than I'd ever read in my life. I took almost every English course at this university because he made me. And I said, why do I have to do that, Mr. Pickett? And he said, because all of your work's going to come from literature. So that would help me. But he made me examine myself, who I was. He would make me do a scene as Brett. That's the first scene I ever did. He said, you're Brett. I don't want to know about how the character worked or any of that. I want you to play it as Brett. And then he made me do it again later as the character, so that there was a different you understood the serious, what the playwright's intent is and who you are, and made me examine all that. So as a teacher, he was phenomenal. But I'll say this, I came to this university thinking, yeah, well, acting. I mean, Dennis, Robert, I had hair down to my waist. I was a surf dude.
He was a surfer dude.
Yeah. Still am, but did. And I didn't know really what, but someone, I think it was you actually, the first year they were doing School for Scandal, and you were working at the Denver Theater playing guitar, making money to move to LA, and I just came to watch the auditions, and it was like, I don't want to do this. Is awful. Sheridan? I mean, this isn't, and I said to you, and this is right when we had just sort of started to get to know each other, and I said, would you want to be in this play? And you went, I'd die to be in this play. And it kind of made me go, okay, what am I missing? And that summer, and I didn't want to do Shakespeare either, and that summer, Pam Donahue said, let's go to the park and see, they're doing, the Houston Shakespeare Festival starting, and they did Midsummers. And I saw it 4 times. And I didn't like Shakespeare. I didn't care about Shakespeare. I didn't want to do Shakespeare. And after that, the visuals that Mr. Pickett created on that stage, what Mark Masterson and what Cindy and what everyone in that cast did.
And the music.
And the music. I'm sorry. I was getting there. But that changed my opinion, and I ended up doing the Shakespeare Festival for the next 4 years. Because I went, well, I don't know if I'm going to be any good, but I want to try this, because it's the most difficult thing for an actor to do, I believe. But his direction as a director, I think, was some of the most brilliantly designed theater I've ever seen in my life.
A lot of directors try to create that visual moment on stage. What worked for him?
He really understood composition.
Yeah, composition.
He
Absolutely.
always talked about composition, and even
Tableau. He always had tableau.
even down to the character that you're playing and where you are on stage, and what that says and what it meant. He understood the visual, and at the same time he was always after the truth of the play, because everything came from the play and the playwright, and he had great respect for the playwright, but then he always had his own stamp on whatever he did, and it was obvious that it was a Cecil Pickett play. There
was always background, there was who was the main character, but he always had the background was just as important in the scene as the main characters. There was always something going on over here. Anywhere you looked on the stage, there was something real going on. If it was like in Hotel Baltimore, there was always something else going on over here while there was this going on over here. And it was always compositionally, like great photography,
He knew how to direct in a way that the focus was supposed to be where it was supposed to be at all times. Never were you ever like going, oh, what's going on over there? Because he physically.
But if you looked, something was going on over there.
Yeah, but it wasn't
like
supposed to
subtext,
draw your attention. He would purposely do it in such a way that it was like background until you would go, well, how he directed that play, the opening was, you guys were all sitting out here, and we had stuff going on stage, and people didn't know at first, and they went, oh my God, there's characters up there. And then it would go on for like 5 minutes, and then slowly but surely the lights would change, and the lights would come up on stage, and those would go down, and then the main character, because it wasn't ever the main characters that were out there, and then like guys like me who had like 2 lines in the play would drift off, and then the play would start. And it was brilliant, but it was all about what happened before you walked in the door. He was that sort of a detail man, and truly, and I'm going to say this, and you guys can agree with me or not agree, but he's I've worked with 2 in my life, one of the few geniuses I worked in my life.
That's true.
Really an amazing, profoundly influential individual in the theater and as a teacher.
That was really one of the main things, was how to build a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, he made us all kind of fascinated about what it was like to actually experience someone else's life. A different character. What is it like to be that person? And you had to, start from the outside in or the inside out. How he would have us go out on the street and just watch people. He got me into watching people and what made them tick, and what was going on them and why. and it became very fascinating.
So then the courses, the things you learn in school, then you go out into the real world. Is it a letdown that you're not working with everyone like Cecil when you get there, or is it hard then to use the lessons you've been taught in the real world environment? When they toss you a script and say go, is it hard to adapt to that then?
You asking me?
I'm asking you. I'm curious because of the music profoundly moved me.
I got to tell you now, and this coming from someone who, they'll tell you, I was the class screw up there. You got to remember, I'm the class.
Tell him what he used to say after you do a scene.
Oh, Bob. Now, you got to remember, I wasn't a drama major, so I come into it, and I learned that it changed my life totally, coming into that. And because, first of all, it changed my life because the greatest thing in life is being a straight male in the drama department. That's... That's one step. The other thing, however, when I got out, and remember, I'm not the guy who studied and took it as seriously as much. However, because of Cecil Pickett, when I got out there, I felt I had a huge leg up on everybody. Didn't you feel that way?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted you to answer.
Yeah, I felt I had a huge leg up because he taught you the craft. And I'm a big person on craft. I mean, he taught you basics. What is your intention? What is the obstacle?
Yeah.
What is the
obstacle?
What
are the beats? What are the motivations?
Beats? What does the character want?
Yeah.
What does he really want?
What does he want?
What's the action?
Yeah.
What is the history of this character? What is his you'd have us write biographies of the character to, starting from birth, where they came from. Really, it was important.
Robert never did.
Created.
Well, it shows.
That's why you
Maybe
were
he didn't tell you that, but he told me that. But to create a life for this person that you could fall back on and go from.
But do you have the opportunity to use those skills when you get out in the real world? You go into Guiding Light pretty early on. Mm-hmm. You're given, 80 pages a day to memorize?
30 pages
30
a
pages?
night, yeah.
Can you have that process when now you are a working actor?
He definitely, I mean, I can say, I know you worked with a lot of people who are probably as good but I really never, I think I found one other director who I found went as deep as my dad did, to create a character. So I not only grew up, he put me on stage when I was 6, and I used to sit on the front row of all of his productions until I got to Bel Air High School. But we have it inside of us,
Right.
If the director, if no one's giving us anything, we have it. It was ingrained in us. It was, he created, he helped us be able to create a character without any help from anyone else.
Well, he used to say this too, because it was about technique as well as instinct. But as far as the technique part of learning all, giving us these tools to work with and how to build a character, he'd say that this technique is something that you learn and then you forget.
Yes.
And it just becomes a part of you. And
he was all about truth.
That was where he was, like learning to ride a bicycle. You don't think about it after a while. It just becomes something that you do.
The ability of the fortune and the ability to study with someone like him and to learn. I mean, just a quick side note, my first day in acting class, in Acting 101, I think is what the class was called, he handed us a book. He said, go get this book. It's called Acting Professionally. And it's about that big. It's really thin. And he made you read it. And the next day, in the next class, he said, okay, let's go through this. There's 120,000 members of the Screen Actors Guild. The average salary of the top 15% of the guild is $3,000 a year. This is Actors Equity. This is AFTRA. And then he said, okay, you got that? And we're like, yeah. And he goes, anyone, if that scares you and you don't really want to do this and take it seriously, leave. And a couple people left. So he gave us a realistic vision of what the world was that we were getting ready to walk into. But he prepared, I believe, anyone who studied with him, when you left the school, you had the tools to work with the worst directors, the best directors, mediocre directors, and directors that don't direct at all, so that you end up doing it yourself because you have the tools to do it. And to create character and to create a true character that's honest and that comes to life. And that's what he gave us, and that's what allowed all of us to make a living.
Robert, do you take all of those tools with you when you write something too?
Absolutely. I think it helped me more in writing. I mean, the effect he had on me is, like I said, so weird because I think of him all the time. And believe me, if Cecil's here today and he'd say, oh, they're having a thing for me, and Cindy and Brett and Dennis and Bob, you know? He would. I mean, but that being said, we did a scene. Dennis directed me in a scene for Cecil, and he was great with us. You know, he was. What did we do? Dinner at 8?
Dinner at 8.
Dinner at 8. And what I learned from him is the writing, absolutely. Again, and it always, again, part of it comes back to that skilled eye cry line, always. But it does help with the characters. You know, what are they doing? What do they want? Even if it's a 3-line character, give him something, you know, even in subtext. Try to think, okay, what does he want? If it's a bellboy coming up, maybe he stands there and wants a tip. You know, it's like, give him something to play as an actor. But it is amazing how influential he was on me and how much I appreciate him more with each day. And I wish I had taken it more seriously, actually, in the classes. I really do. He was always supportive. He was supportive of me because I think he got a kick out of me for some reason. And also I think I had a huge love of acting in movies, and I think he appreciated that, the history I knew, and he liked that a lot. And I was coming from somewhere else. Remember, I'm the Jewish kid from New Jersey.
What actually brought you to U of H?
They accepted me. True story. There was a war going on. There was a war going on, and I had to go to school. I mean, I make jokes about it. I mean, I was the only Jew rejected from the University of Miami at the time, you know. You know, so, and I came here, and I don't join the drama department for my first 4 years in school. You know,
how many years actually were you here?
7. I crammed 4 years into 7. But the last 3 years was the drama department, and the first show I do is I auditioned for Fiddler on the Roof, which was Sidney Berger's show, and he cast me as the rabbi, and I was just, yeah, I know. And I'm there, and I'm having a blast. I mean, people are really into this thing, and you know, I'm not in the drama department, so they're really taking this seriously. I'm having a blast, and I'm doing stuff, and I'm listening to the ball game in my ear as I'm doing the lines here. And didn't you play like a Cossack or something like that in Fiddler on the Roof? You had a very small thing. It was like
I pulled curtain actually on Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah. I might have walked on as a Cossack. I have a dim memory of it, but I pulled curtain.
But then I got more and more into it, and I loved it, and I had a great time. And I met a lot of people who, to this day, one friend in particular, who was a friend of all of ours, who really got me into Cecil, was a guy named Tim Errington. And Tim's no longer with us, but he was big. I mean, he was a character. He was an ultimate character, became a dear friend, worked with me on Arliss, and he died. But he was important. But he bred, you know, he breathed the gospel of Cecil Pickett.
When you left here, did you go right into showbiz?
Yeah, I went up to New York and started doing stand-up comedy pretty soon. I started writing for Rodney Dangerfield in comics, and then that led to opportunities. And because I could act, I had an acting background, I had a craft. Unlike a lot of other comics, who first go to take acting lessons, I was way ahead of the game then. I was so far ahead of it, so that when I got an opportunity to do a movie, I was ready. I felt totally comfortable. I was totally prepared. So yeah, and that's all because of Cecil in the UH drama department. Absolutely.
Brett, how about for you? When you left, where did you go?
Well, I graduated in 1979.
Sure, rub it in.
I know.
Right.
Did you graduate?
Yeah.
I graduated in 1979. 5 years. But anyway, I got an offer to go to Florida State and work at the Oslo State Theater to get my master's. And they gave me this. I had 32 schools that had made offers to me, and I was like, whoa. So I made this really great deal. And I was doing the Shakespeare Festival, I was working as a printer during the day with Timothy Arrington and Big Skinny Brown,
Who was here?
who was with us last night. And I read for Urban Cowboy, which goes back to my friend here, because Dennis was originally set to play that role, if I remember correctly, and you stepped aside because Paramount asked you to.
I didn't step aside. I was pushed aside.
He was pushed aside, so
because John Travolta decided he wanted
I didn't
to do
know
it.
that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
which I heard
It
about.
was actually written for me.
I didn't know that at all.
And I was pissed when I heard they'd done that, and I went in to read for Travolta's best friend. Would have been his best friend. So I worked in the print shop all day. I had ink all over me. I had my cowboy shirt on. I walked in, and Ed Geldhart, a local actor here, said, "Well, if you're reading next, you're reading with Travolta because he's in there." So I was like, "Yeah, good." So I went in and I nailed it. And his manager, I didn't get the part because they wanted a good old boy. And his manager called me and convinced me to move to Hollywood. And I did. He told me to get a tan, so I went to San Diego and surfed for 2 weeks. Like, that was hard to do. Moved into my apartment September 5th, 1979 on Beechwood Canyon, paid $172 a month, and got a series 3 weeks later with Robert Preston and Rosemary Harris, which, funnily enough, and I didn't call, I called Bob at one point when the first week I was, or second week I was there, he was at the Comedy Store, and I saw him. You remember that? And you and I went out? I didn't call Dennis because I didn't want to be one of those guys going, "Hey, I'm in town." Dude.
You were the only one.
I know.
It's true.
Which is why he claims we became so close out in Hollywood, because I never asked him for much. But anyway, I was there, and I called Dennis after we had been shooting in Colorado and Mammoth, California. I came back for the holidays, and I called him, and I went, "Dennis, it's Brett." He's like, "Hey." And I go, "What are you doing?" I go, I got a job." He goes, you got a job? And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Doing what?" And I go, I'm doing the series for CBS called The Chisholms." And he drops the phone. He's laughing so hard because he thought I was working as a waiter, and I'd gotten really fortunate. And so from that point forward, I've, been working professionally for 32 years. And I like to say to people, I've been rich 5 times and poor 6, but I still pay my bills and I still make a living, and I'm really proud of the career that I have. So, and it's all because of Cecil Pickett.
Dennis, when you get done with school, what's your first step?
Well,
actually,
I never graduated. I wasn't going to teach, and I didn't know what I'd do with a degree in drama. And I was so set on being an actor, despite the odds. And so I went out to L.A. in my junior year. It went about it in the way that I'd learned from Cecil, and also from my brother and Trey Wilson and everybody who had gone out from Cecil's class before. It took me a year to get an agent, and then I got a job. It took me another year to get another job, and then I got into a movie called Breaking Away, and then things got a little easier for me. The first thing I actually did when I got out there is my brother was doing Missouri Breaks up in Montana, and he wanted his car, so I drove his car up to Montana, and my first education on a film set was watching Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson, act for 4 months. But I came back here after that, and just to hang out at the drama department. I would come up here, and it was like coming home, to the nest. And I sat in on a couple of Cecil's classes, and I'd been here for about 4 or 5 days. And I remember being in the office, and Mr. Pickett was putting away mail. I still can't call him Cecil. He was putting away mail in the office. And he had his back to me, and he said, "Dennis, why are you still here?" And he was kicking me out of the nest, and a very loving, brutal way. And so I went back.
Yeah. Cindy, how about for you?
Well, I went to New York. I sold everything I had, about $500 in my pocket, went to meet this agent, and I got a job selling perfume in Macy's. I was spraying perfume on people, and I would call, you had a phone service back then. I would go and call my service, and one day I called, and I had gotten a soap opera, The Guiding Light. And and from there, I just, my career just opened. I met Roger Vadim like a year later, and he went to the Philippines and did a feature for him. And then I got scared and went back to the guiding light for a year, and didn't trust that anything would happen after that. And then I left that, and then I came out to LA for an audition for Marilyn Monroe in, I've forgotten what it was. It was
Smash.
Yeah, that was it.
Everyone's on that show.
And I just kept working, and and it was
When you
just
say
great.
you get out there and you're working at Macy's and you're, at that point, for all of you too, when that moment comes, do you all question that you made the right choice? Do you all have that time where you think, was this really the right way to go with my life? Or did you go into it knowing these were the steps that were going to be before you?
That's what I went in knowing. These were I think all of us. I mean,
Right.
I never doubted. I mean, I think I had $100 left, and I knew that this was my profession, and I never thought, oh, well, maybe what else can I do? I just went forward.
It's the only way you can do it.
yeah.
You've got to have that kind of faith, and I remember being in up in class or working on a scene with someone, and they said, well, what's your minor? And I said, I don't have one. Well, what are you going to fall back on? I said, fall back to what? Because I couldn't see doing anything else with my life, no matter how high the odds were stacked against me.
I considered being successful if I could pay my bills, if I could make a living as an actor. And I meant it earlier when I said I've been, and Dennis knows this and Robert very well, there have been times where I've had to maybe consider selling my house. Tough times, where you wonder, is this ending, or is it going to keep going? And I've never really given up faith in that, that I have the ability to make a living and to be a success. And I fortunately, and it's happened just a couple of times where I've really had to question my faith in it. But I've made a living for 32 years, and I've never waited a table. I never had to work at Macy's. I was very fortunate that when I moved out there, I got this gig, and it sort of propelled me from that to the Thornbirds to I did a lot of television, and I'm now working a lot in film, and it's been very exciting and scary. But the thing that was always underneath all of it, and it's still to this day, and anything that I do, I always say, what would Cecil say? How would he judge me? And I try to sort of stay true to that.
Why go through all of this? What was it that pulls you back all the time to wanting to be an actor?
I'm fascinated on what it's like to experience someone else's life, of what that feels like, and what makes people tick, and to try to portray my version of the truth of that. And Mr. Pickett used to say, it's not like what's it like to be someone else, or what would this character do? It's what would I do if I were this character? And that's what's so fascinating.
Yeah. Does that hold true too when you're playing real life people that have lived, astronauts you've played, or people that you can find out who they were? What about the freedom there?
Well, what's great about that is that you have such great access to. You don't have to write the biography, for one thing. that saves some time, And with Bill Clinton, I actually spent time in the White House with him years before, and so I had a little insight there. But I like playing real people. There's a bigger responsibility in playing real people, I think, because you're after capturing their essence, and all sides of them.
Yeah.
I did a miniseries for HBO called From the Earth to the Moon, and I had done Apollo 13 with Tom, and he called me and said, would you be interested? And our technical advisor on Apollo 13 was a guy named Dave Scott, who was the, I think Apollo 18, he was the commander of that mission. He called and said, would you like to play Dave Scott? And I said, geez, because he was the tallest astronaut they'd ever had. He was 6 foot, blonde, So I went, I'd be honored. So the scary thing about that, though, was I got to do it, but he was the technical advisor on the miniseries, and I'd be in the capsule with, I don't know who I was sitting, was it, what's his name, Tony, it's a senior moment. Anyway, I'm with this other actor, and we're doing the scene, and then we do it, and they go cut, and I could literally, I'd look like this, and Dave would be standing where Dennis is, and I go, is that any good? He goes, better than when I did it. And I was really, my wife's here, when it aired on HBO, and it was a very successful miniseries, and a really beautifully well done one. He invited me to his house to watch it. The main episode about him, which was when he went to the moon on his mission. And we had those 50s dinner trays, and we had dinner, and when it was all done, and we watched the show, and I was sitting there watching me play him while he was sitting there watching me play him. And when it was done and said, I didn't know what to say, because I was very touched. I was moved, and I was trying not to cry, as my wife knows me so very well. And I started to say something. He went, Brett. I said, yeah. And he went, thank you. And that was it. And he wasn't a man of many words, but that was it. And I just realized, okay, I did a good job.
A man who does have quite a few words is Bill Clinton. Any reaction to your portrayal of him?
There was no reaction, actually.
He called, said, Dennis, I'm not real happy.
Absolutely.
I thought we were friends.
Well, I thought so too. But that's just the way it goes.
He was
fantastic. There's other things like playing Jerry Lee Lewis and actually having them on the set.
Yeah.
While you were, Jerry Lee was on the set like every day, and he would be carrying like his .32 pistol in his pocket and his bottle of Seagram 7 that you never know what was actually in that. And he'd be over my shoulder going, "You're doing it wrong, son. You're doing it wrong." Or playing an astronaut like Gordo Cooper, who wound up, after I got the part, the dream of a lifetime to play an astronaut. We're from Houston, for God's sakes, and they were my heroes. And he wound up living 3 miles from me in LA, and we became great friends. I learned how to fly airplanes because of that. Or Doc Holliday, fell in love with him, and really used Cecil's work on that, like losing 42 pounds and to see what it felt like to have his illness. And it's fascinating about acting is when you get out there in the world like that, and you get to go through all those doors that say authorized personnel only. To get into all these other worlds that you would never have a chance to in life.
I got to go up in a T-38 doing Call to Glory.
Oh, that's right.
A T-30, a trainer jet.
Yeah.
Civilians don't do that.
Throw up?
No, I did not.
Throw up.
I did.
Did you eat bacon? You ate breakfast?
Oh, I barfed in my helmet.
Oh!
Robert, let me ask you, when you are then creating a character, when you're building a character such as Arliss, where you are actually starting from the blank page to create this character, is that the opportunity to bring in all the things you want to play with and try and do, or do you have to be very disciplined when creating?
Well, Arliss was a little bit different. Arliss started out as a mini-series. They came to me and they asked about doing a Spinal Tap of sports. This is HBO. And it was going to be a Spinal Tap of sports, and we were going to go to the Spinal Tap of the Super Bowl and the Spinal Tap of the World Series. And I said, I don't know what that means, really. But I'll tell you what I would like to do, because I saw it on The Muppet Show and some other stuff that was similar to that. I go, I'll write a 6-episode miniseries of a satire of world of sports as told through a very self-serving sports agent. Now, sports agents had not been in the mainstream that much at that point. So I was using that, and I was using actually Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal as in fact, Arliss was always a book. It always opened up as a book, The Art of the Sports Super Agent, which came strictly from Donald Trump, because I never found anybody more self-serving in my life than Donald Trump. I mean, and I always loved the idea of he's telling you how he did it, and then I could show counterpoint in what really went on, as he was narrating how I did this and I did this, and you saw it really went on. So I went and spoke with a lot of agents. I spoke with a lot of agents who, and by the way, I always looked at it as a guy running a business. I didn't look at it as a sports show. The greatest compliment I ever had was, one of them, was Fran Lebowitz, the writer. You know Fran Lebowitz, right? She met me in New York one time with a chain smoke, and she says, "I hate sports, but I love your show." Because it wasn't about sports. It was about characters in the world of sports, and that goes back to the acting. It was a guy running a job. He just happens to have a unique clientele, and he's an agent. He is a sports agent, and an agent is parasitic by nature. It is, whether it's a real estate agent, a theatrical agent, a travel agent, he is an agent. So now he happens to have a unique clientele because they're very young, they're very rich, and they play in a big thing. So I learned a lot, and I knew about sports, and I knew professional sports, and I was much more involved in human nature. I was more involved in telling stories. I wanted to tell stories about somebody coming down with Alzheimer's. I wanted to talk about domestic violence. As funny as it was, I wanted to get darker. So Arliss was a little bit different. Now also I'm creating the character and I'm writing the character. So it was a little bit different, and I'm doing an HBO series, which was wonderful because, as we've all done on HBO, you don't have to you don't have to worry about commercials, and you don't have to worry about commercial sponsors, and you don't have to worry about subject matter. So that was a great, that was just a great, from a creative point of view, just a great experience.
Yeah. You talk about doors opening up. And so you've got to think, when you become identified as Ferris Bueller's mom, there's something that's going to be with you. I mean, it doesn't matter what you ever do. You're always going to be known as Ferris Bueller's mom.
And you know, she did have a name, but it's always Ferris Bueller's mom. Isn't that funny?
Do you know the character's
Katie.
name? Katie.
Katie Bueller.
Okay, so Katie, when do you realize what you're making is going to work?
Oh, well, we didn't know. I mean, John Hughes had a series of movies, Pretty in Pink, and I think Breakfast Club was, I can't believe.
Sweet 16.
Yeah,
Sweet
16 Candles.
16 Candles.
16 Candles. And this was just another one of his, and we knew it was fun, but we had no idea. And honestly, when it came out, it wasn't what it became. It just was the one of all of those that seemed to hit a nerve, and that it was kind of timeless. I mean, it was what he says, that last line at the end of the movie. Life is short, be sure and enjoy every day. It just really, I think, it was just an iconic movie. It's just a classic. It hit everyone, no matter what age. And so no, we didn't know.
Yeah.
I think your dad used to actually say that's how you know that something is universal, or that it's art, is 25 years later.
Yeah.
Does it stand up? Is it still fresh?
I was in Batman. I mean, when that one was, you knew it was going to be this big explosion going to happen. That's something. I still get card show stuff from back, from all these. I did a cult movie called The Hollywood Knights, my first movie ever.
New bomb.
And to this day, outside of Arliss, I get stopped. Maybe Batman. I get stopped more for that than anything I've ever done. So you do touch. It is amazing. I mean, what do you get stopped the most for? What do you get stopped?
I get the
Jerry Lee?
Rookie and
Rookie, sure.
And Jerry Lee and The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine's Guiding Light and Ferris Bueller.
And
What about you, Brett?
You get stopped for the. I got it from the Earth to the Moon and the.
The mostly
right
these
stuff.
days is Lost.
Of course. And West Wing.
West Wing.
West Wing. He was the vice.
But I was also, I don't know why, but The Replacements.
The Replacements,
plays
absolutely.
so often.
Yeah.
Okay, and people are like, you're the quarterback. They don't go, you played Martell. Like, no, you're the. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. But yeah, it's not, obviously I did that very well.
Oh, I got to say,
What would I do if I were that
Yes,
character?
if I was that's how I'd be.
How do you think Cecil would critique all of your work currently?
Oh my gosh.
Do you want to hear a great story?
Sure.
At your father's, at the funeral home.
Oh.
I went, and it was really hard for me. I was a pallbearer, as was Dennis, and it was the night before the funeral, and I was there, and some girl came up to me who was younger than I and had studied with Cecil, and she said, Mr. Pickett always talked about you. And I said, really? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I once asked him if you were a wonderful actor, and he said, Brett works really hard.
That's high praise.
Well, no, and I initially
high
went,
praise.
oh my God. Not, you know, after all this and the love I have for this man, I work. And then I thought about it and I realized, because my relationship with him was, I was a baseball player and a surfer who came here, and I didn't know the theater world. I didn't know how it worked, the clicks and all that stuff. And I just kind of was like, you know, dude, I want to do this. And you kick my, I'm used to coaches who kick my, and he did. And he made me work really hard. And to this day, I still go, you know, I learn every second. I never stop learning. And I learn when I work with a bad director or see a bad movie or I see a brilliant film. When I see bad actors making mistakes, when I see bad behavior on set, I learn from that. And I still, to this day, I mean, I go back, I still have, because your dad taught Stanislavski and he also taught Uta Hagen. Those are his primary sort of, like, I think he started as Uta Hagen after you had left, really. But
I used to refer to her all the time.
Right. I have his book still, and I have it, you know, highlighted in areas that, you know, he really would beat us up on. And I remember going back just about a year ago, looking at it and going, forgot that. You know, but it's a constant process of doing that. But I work really hard, and I think now I look at that and I think, you know what, he's perfectly on the money. You know, I don't think I'm Brando or Sean Penn. I'm a really good actor, but I want to learn, and I work hard at it. And I realized later that I should have been really flattered instead of like what does that mean? But it.
Do you ever feel you have arrived?
In fact, he used to speak of that. Once you feel like you've arrived, you're dead. Because you stop learning, you stop exploring, and you just rest on your laurels, you become lazy, and it affects your work.
I would think Cecil Pickett would be so proud of you, because Dennis's career, you know, Dennis, in the beginning, a lot of people, because he's young and incredibly good looking, he was a leading man. But I always said you'd have no idea how good an actor Dennis is. He's going to get into a character, and as Dennis's career has gotten, you know, as we've grown older, Dennis has become as good an actor, and they say the term character actor, and Cecil used to say all acting is character acting.
Yeah.
You're playing a character. And people, whether it's Bill Clinton, whether it's the guy in Days of Heaven, or whatever, Far From Heaven, pardon me, and all the Doc Holliday, Dennis is a great character actor. He is going to be. Dennis's acting is so good, which is a lot of pretty boys, and they get older, do not do well. They don't have the background. A lot of them are ex-models, and they mumble. They don't have the presence. They don't have the craft. They don't have the technique. They don't work as hard as this man does. I think he'd be so proud of your career, even now more than ever, because of the body of work you have done, ladies and gentlemen. I really believe that. And I tell everybody that. Me, on the other hand,
What would he say about your career?
let them talk about that. I can't imagine what he would think. I mean, I went to the point. He'd be proud because, you know.
I think he would be extraordinarily proud of Robert.
Yeah.
From the stand-up to Arliss, or to stand up to the films, to Arliss and History 101. And, you know, he called me once and he goes, I'm doing this TV show. This is Bob, he's funny. He's like, what do they pay on these things? So I go, well, this is generally what top of the show is, which is what they kind of pay these days. He goes, he's doing this thing. So he calls me, I tell him, and he shoots it. And then one night, and I watch Boston Legal, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching the show. And he comes on, and it's some of the best work you've done in years. I mean, as an actor. I was like, I call him. I'm like, Bob, you need to be doing this more. Yeah. I don't know. But it's like, it was fantastic, and I think Cecil would be extraordinarily proud of how you've grown as an artist, how you've grown as a comedian, as a writer. I think he would be thrilled, and he might cast you now.
50-50.
Maybe.
Cindy, was it hard, different, ever uncomfortable having him as your father? And especially when your career gets going, are there the calls? Are there the, you know, you could have, or any work
absolutely.
with you in that? But was that uncomfortable or was that welcomed?
No, I mean, I idolized my dad. He was, you know, when I was in high school and when I was in college, I had to really earn a role because he didn't just give anyone a role because he liked them. I had to audition and I had to really be right and be the one that was the best for that role. But it was mostly on Call to Glory, which was this great series I did with Craig T. Nelson.
Yeah.
And he would call me and he would say, you know, Cindy, you're pushing a little much here, you know, and he would, I think until he died, he would call me and when he thought I wasn't being truthful, you know, because he really he believed in that so much.
And you did Shakespeare Festival back when you were here.
Yeah,
at school.
I did Midsummer Night's Dream.
And now you're coming back again.
Yeah. I haven't done Shakespeare.
Good for you.
Ooh, I don't even know when to count the years.
So
it's not the doing Shakespeare. It's our senior memory that, you know.
Right.
But anyway, it'll be a challenge, and I really am excited about it.
What makes U of H's Shakespeare Festival so special, do you think?
To me or to the world?
Both, actually.
Well, I think any Shakespeare festival in any big city is important, and I remember it was such a class act. You know, it's a great stage. It's in the Miller Theater. It's I hear they have air conditioning now sprayed out in the audience. I just remember it as being just a powerful experience. Just doing Shakespeare alone is a wonderful experience, and it was very professional, and it was, you know, it was Cecil directing it, so it was brilliant, and you know, I think you're lucky to have that. I think it's wonderful.
That was one of the great things about being here at the University of Houston, is that you were in a place, you were in a safe place where you could try things and fail and fall flat on your face, and that was the only way that you learned, and that was Cecil was guiding us through. But you got to do things, you could like Shakespeare or Bertolt Brecht or Tennessee Williams and Pinter, all this material that you never in your career later on are ever going to get a chance to do, probably. And it was great to have that foundation.
The first year I did the Shakespeare Festival was the second year, and it was Romeo and Juliet. I played Balthazar. It was Saturday night, and I ran into two friends of mine who I grew up with, who, and I don't know if I can say this on PBS, but they said, hey, Brett, you still doing that acting? And
You probably can't say that on PBS.
Yeah. So bleep that. Are you still doing that acting stuff? And I was like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm doing Romeo and Juliet in the park tonight. Where? What park? And I said, Miller Theater down, Herman. And they go, oh, well, we might come down there. And I said, well, good. And so there's a moment where I run on stage to tell Romeo that Juliet has died. And Balthazar's not a very large role, but it's an important part. So I run on stage and I start to say my dialogue, and Chris Rich, who is an actor in Hollywood, was playing Romeo. And he went to UT, so I run on stage and I go, Romeo, my lord. And he turns, and this 7,000 people are, in the theater, and then on the, that hill. It was like 7,000 people, and all of a sudden you hear this voice, "Hi, Colin!" And I freeze, and he looks at me like, and I start to speak again, and my other friend, TJ, goes, and they're drunk on their drinking wine on the hill and just think it's all right because they thought they were at a rock concert, I guess.
No, it's like the groundlings at a real Shakespeare play, right?
So, but that was my first experience. What I found was that Shakespeare taught me as an artist one of the more difficult things to do, which is to take something that is so alien to you, because no one speaks like that, but to understand the human element in a classic and to be able to bring it to life. I discovered Shakespeare in the classics here in Houston, and it was one of the most exciting things that I've ever experienced. And I also got to work with really good friends of mine, and most of them went to the school here, and I got to hear great music.
And
my other experience with the Shakespeare Festival, besides my music, is that I was never in any of the plays. I never did Shakespeare. He never comes up with anything new. But same stuff. But the other thing that happened to me at the Shakespeare Festival is I was arrested. I was fooling around with a girl who was in the box office, And after the hours, the theater had closed, and we were fooling around in the box office, and the security guard, at the time, was convinced we had drugs, and he actually threw me in prison. He actually threw me. So my feeling on the Shakespeare Festival is a little bit different than everybody else.
Well,
do you know how Cecil would work with us? With I call my dad Cecil because everyone else does now. But he would make sure that we got. When we get our playbooks, we would get one that on the left-hand side was the English version, if we were just to speak it conversationally. And he would have us know what we were saying and make it as conversational as possible so that the audience would understand. When I was at University of Texas with B. Iden Payne, who was one of the great Shakespeare scholars, it was all about the beauty of the poetry of the language. But I thought I liked understanding what I was saying, and the audience liked understanding what we were saying because, again, it made it more truthful, more real. It wasn't the beautiful. Well, the beautiful language is there anyway, but he that's the way he worked.
Well, I thank all of you for bringing all that beautiful language to life for all of these years, and a special thanks goes out to your dad.
What I think we should do is give a great round of applause for a great human being who gave so much to so many kids and gave them a guiding light in their lives.
Yes.
To Mr. Pickett.
I'm Dean Mitchell, and I live in Tampa, Florida. I grew up in a small town in North Florida. My first experience with art was really with my grandmother getting me a paint-by-number set. And she had only had a fourth grade education. My mother was the first to go to college and the only college graduate out of her 4 children. And when I said I wanted to go into art, she was like, no way, you've never made to make a living. And she said, in fact, I'll be quite frankly, she said, a black man couldn't possibly make a living selling paintings or pictures, she said. And my mom's sister said, and I don't know if African Americans are going to buy that kind of thing. I mean, I was not encouraged at all to go into art. But my grandmother thought I really loved it, and so she encouraged me. And so I ended up, believe it or not, getting accepted at the Columbus College of Art and Design. And believe it or not, I didn't even know what a portfolio was. I set my drawings up in a little vanilla envelope, so I don't even know how I got into art school. But my first experience in art school was pretty scary because I didn't understand a lot of terminology. I was from a very small town, and people said, oh, you got a lot of talent, you got a really lot of talent, you're really gifted. Well, I tell you, when I went into the School of the Arts, I just thought, man, I was way below. Maybe this isn't a field I should go into. I didn't realize the kids who had been trained prior to, they had tutors and all kinds of things. So I just basically worked very hard, but that first semester, I lost about 60 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I lost about 60 pounds just from stress alone. And I caught a Greyhound bus for about 18 to 20 hours to go to this school. It was in Ohio. And I lived in Florida. And so when I got back home from Christmas, my grandmother called my mom and said, he can't go back to that art school. I don't know what you're teaching, but he has lost way too much weight. And so my mom said, well, I got on the phone with my mother. She says, well, I can't take care of you the rest of your life. And I got back on that Greyhound bus and I went back to that school. And I realized that if I was going to truly make any kind of living at this, that I had to give it my all. And so I became very fascinated with watercolors. I didn't do very much watercolor when I was in high school. I was mostly oil. And I ran into a student who was very, very talented at doing watercolors. He had this huge black thing and had 2 big side arms to it. I said, what's that? He said, a portfolio. Portfolio? I said, and I was on work study because I had to work for part of my scholarship programs. And so I said, are you coming back through here? He said, yeah. I said, where are you going with that? He said, I'm going to show it to some of the professors. They were very fascinated with this guy. This guy was very, very talented. He came back through, he put the portfolio on the floor, and he opened it up, and I was just mesmerized by watercolors. I ran back to the dorm to tell some of the guys I was staying with. I said, there's this guy. And I said, John Palancar, you ever heard of him? He said, oh God, Dean, that guy is so, you're never going to be that good at watercolor. Forget it. It ain't going to happen. I went to the library. I checked out so many books on watercolor. I mean, I was trying left and right. They were laughing at me saying, you're never going to get good at that stuff. By sophomore year, they weren't laughing anymore.
And how many watercolor awards have you won?
Oh God, close to probably 500 or 600.
500 or 600. Is everyone listening to that?
And actually, I had a professor there who taught watercolor. His name was Leland McClellan. And during my senior year, he said, have you ever heard of the American Watercolor Society? I said, no, I don't know what that is. He said, I think you might want to give it a shot. And my senior year, I sent one of my paintings there, and I got in. So I couldn't believe it. I ran, when I told Mr. McClellan, I said, Mr. McClellan, I got in this American Watercolor Society. He said, excuse me? He said, you really got in? You really got in? Your first try? I said, yeah, I did. He said, I've been trying for 20 years and I've never gotten in. But he was really, really thrilled for me. And I started entering different competitions. And this is really how I got known. But believe it or not, there was a lot of turmoil in my career because when I first got out of college, I started, as I began to go to different museums, I saw very few African Americans in the collections. And so then I started entering these different shows, and I started getting a little more known. And in fact, I worked at Hallmark Cards from 80 to 83. And believe it or not, a lot of my friends were illustrators. And I really didn't care for illustration. I always wanted to be a painter. And a lot of my friends said, you're never going to be in the museums. It's never going to happen for you. You're dreaming. It's not going to happen. And I said, well, this is really something that I really want to aspire to do. And so I entered all these different competitions. And as I was winning awards, I thought, well, maybe this is my window into possibly getting people to know who I am as a painter. And I went to a lot of the local art organizations and things like that. But what I found out was that a lot of times they would have their openings and only people who would come would be artists, other artists. No one was coming in and supporting the work. So I was trying to figure out a way in which I could sustain my living because I got let go from Hallmark. I got let go and I just bought an automobile that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to keep. It was just, I mean, my grandmother who raised me passed. It was just not a very good time. Quite frankly, I was suicidal. I didn't want to go back home because I grew up in a small rural town called Quincy, Florida. And I said, well, what if I go back home, what am I going to do? I mean, so I stayed in Kansas City, and I stayed in Kansas City for about 25 years. And that place ended up being a good place for me because it was right in the center of the country. And I was trying to figure out how could I get nationally known to get people to pay attention to my work, to support me as an artist. And so I entered all these competitions, and next thing I knew, I was getting an article in a local newspaper, and I realized, I started recognizing the power of the press and how it played a major role in an artist marketing their work to the public in general. One of my first gallery shows was actually, professional gallery shows was in Kansas City at the American Legacy Gallery. We sold a few things. I worked about 6 months on a show. I made about $750. I thought, this is not going to work. And so, believe it or not, at that time, even when I was at the Columbus College of Art and Design, my mother had encouraged me to enter a show in Panama City, Florida, which was about a good 2 hours from Quincy. And when she told me I should enter the show, I looked at the brochure. I got a brochure. I said, Mom, this includes like 20 counts. I probably won't even get in. She said, well, just enter it anyway. So I entered it, and I won a prize. It was a savings bond, a $100 savings bond. So I went down to pick it up, and when I walked in the door with my cousin Carl and so forth, they said, oh, you're black. This is true. They said, oh, you're black. I said, yes. And she says, well, no, you're the first black person to ever enter our show. They were so thrilled with me. One of the ladies there by the name of Joanne Dickerson, she took me around to a lot of the galleries. Now this was in, I would say, I graduated in 75, so this was probably in the mid-70s, around 77. She took me around up and down the Panhandle Coast. Nobody would take my work. And so she found out that no one wanted to take my work because I was African American. And so I had my first show at a bar on Sunday, and people came and bought my work. And we found out there was a new gallery that had just opened in Panama City. and he was a Hungarian immigrant by the name of Zoltán Bush, who was still there on Beck Avenue. He had my first show. He sent out little black and white invitations, and on Saturday morning when we came to open up the gallery, about 3 blocks of people lined up to buy my work as a kid, and that helped me get through college.
And did the other galleries go, ooh, kick myself?
Oh, you know what? One of the, actually, when I got out and I was a professional, there was a lady there who, she owned one of the oldest galleries there, and she wouldn't take my work in, but she came to one of my shows there at Zoltán's in Panama City. And she said she was so sorry. She said, "You were just a fine young man. I missed out." And she was very gracious. She was probably in her 90s. And so I've been very, very fortunate. I won't kid you. I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of people who have mentored me and helped me along the way. But I've also, when I first got fired from Hallmark, the first book I actually bought was an artist market book, and I bought a book on how to invest $1,000 to $5,000, and that's how I found out about 401ks and IRAs. And I said, if I ever got any money, how could I sustain myself? Because what I wanted as a painter was not to, because when you start entering into the business aspect of it, what happens is people have to sell your work. And so I had one gallery kept telling me, we can't sell your work, it's too personal, it's too personal. And he tried to tell me what to paint. And I just wasn't that kind of person. I didn't really like that kind of work. And the places that they told me to paint were very commercial. They just didn't interest me from a spiritual standpoint. And so the jury competitions became my platform because, believe it or not, sometimes I would win between $20,000 and $30,000 a year just entering competitions. I could barely sell the work in galleries sometimes, but I could win awards, and I was sustaining myself for a number of years that way. And after articles, then I got more representation from different galleries. But I've always wanted to maintain a freedom of expression.
Right.
Because to me, that is the power of the work. That's where the soul lies for the artist. Because once you get into the commercial aspect of it, it's so hard to lose yourself. I don't know if you understand this. For me, art is more than just a pretty picture. I'm trying to say something cultural. I'm trying to say something deep and something to move people to a higher level of humanity, and that's a different kind of sensibility.
Well, let me actually take that and jump to this painting, because if you look around the art show, this is a different painting for this show, because I'm an art historian, so I'll jump ahead and put my art historian twist on it.
Yes.
It's not the same sort of nostalgia.
Yes.
I think that we see around us in a different way. So I'd love it if you talk to us about this painting.
Well, I hadn't been to the Phoenix area that much. I am at a show down there that's held annually at the Phoenix Art Museum. And usually my wife is really the avid reader. And so we discovered that the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright has a winter home. And Talents West is his winter home, and so we ventured up because I'm interested in history,
yeah.
And so when we got up there, it was just magnificent. The way he designed things, the way it played into the landscape, and so this particular portion of the design of the Talents West was set. It was slightly way in the back, but there was a road leading to it, and the way it sat around the mountains was just so poetic, and the way the trees enveloped it felt like it belonged. And I Googled it, and I wanted to read more about his design and how he used the local materials. He used actual rocks. He also used, I think, some kind of canvas for the roofing. But apparently from the heat, the concentrated heat, they had to use something else. They had to use plasters because the heat was so concentrated. But there was also another thing I read where I think during the Truman administration, they were starting to do a lot of electrical polling in the area. And so he fought against that. He did not want these lines running around this. He wanted to keep it as natural as possible. So I just admired the way the light struck the structures, and there was a certain kind of abstraction to it. And with watercolor, it's such an immediate type of medium, and there's a certain amount of spontaneity and freedom, and I kind of wanted to envelop all that freedom with what he was trying to do with the materials.
But this is not Frank Lloyd Wright.
No, it's right in the same area. It's right in the same area. but I like the way it kind of all blended into the landscape.
So what is the subject of this?
It's, I actually, believe it or not, I thought it was one of his. It felt like one of his,
did it?
his designs. It felt because it was on the same properties, and there was nothing else. There was nothing else. There was an area that was very, very finely manicured, and so for me as an artist, I like things that kind of where nature is kind of having some kind of effect on it.
Yep.
So, and the way the light hits it, it really, and the fact that I wasn't very familiar with cactuses, so I also like the way I just like the feel of it.
Yeah, they're sort of human and architectural all at the same time. And to me what this is, it's sort of like as if I'm looking at the Frank Lloyd Wright piece here, and I've just turned my head to something that isn't usually that kind of, Frank Lloyd Wright, and then,
and I kind of liked. I wasn't, actually, I wasn't quite sure it was his or not, but I knew it was on the grounds. But the way it felt to me as a painter, for whatever reason, it had a haunting quality to it. And I like things that have a warmness and feel like that someone's lived in it. There's a sense of life that's been there. A lot of times, with the West in particular, the West is very scenic. It has wonderful mountains, and there's a certain kind of majestic, romantic beauty to it. But for me as a painter, I like places where I think the hand of man has kind of settled into the landscape, and I look for things like that when I'm
and I think that's interesting. You talk about where nature is sort of starting to reclaim almost, what's happened here, the sort of balance of the hand of man, and then when does that tree kind of say, okay, now this is mine?
This is mine, yes.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that the Native American people also used their raw materials and the sand and all these different things. So I wondered if Frank Lloyd Wright was inspired by some of all of that. And I guess in sort of keeping in a certain kind of tradition of what they were doing.
So interesting. Now, okay, so you live in Florida.
Yes.
You lived in Kansas City for a while.
Yes.
Now, probably none of us would say, oh, that's the West. So how do you then get to painting the West? I mean, if we think of things regionally.
You know what? It's so funny. When I first started getting invited to a lot of the Western shows, I realized that there was a particular type of look that people define the American West. And for me as a painter, I didn't want to be obviously West. I wanted to be in the West, the subject itself, but I wanted to take people beyond the sort of obvious of the West. I'm more of a painter who's looking for a certain kind of intimacy of the West. I want people to look at it in a more intimate way, because certainly you can look at the vastness of the landscape. There is just an ominous beauty just by nature itself. The way the light hits the mountains and just the whole atmosphere of the landscape is just magnificent. But to take people into the nooks and crannies of something so that they become more intimately woven into the feeling of the place, it's a different kind of sensibility that I'm looking for as a painter.
And I think watercolor is a medium that almost encourages sort of closeness, the intimacy, in a way that's I think of as compared to the operatic, panoramic, oil.
Absolutely. And I think so many artists have done that. So I think for me, looking for your own authentic voice within that landscape, for me, looking around and walking around and just through observation alone, because like I said, I grew up in a different landscape. I grew up in the South, but I also grew up in an area where there were a lot of architectural homes, dilapidated things. In fact, as a child, I grew up in a shack, but I was only about a year old or so I don't remember what it looked like. And so, but these buildings were not just buildings, but people's lives. There was a lot of richness. And I think sometimes people will look at something as impoverished from a physical standpoint, but sometimes behind those woven walls are people's dreams, their hopes, their aspirations. Even listening to, they got a special now on Roosevelt, on the Roosevelt family, and just listening to how Roosevelt dealt with the Depression and all those different things and trying to encourage people to lift themselves up. I saw a lot of the West was a part of all of that. And so for me as a painter, I am very interested in the human condition and how we relate to the landscape. also how we take care of it and how it takes care of us. The natural materials, we take raw materials and we make things, we make our homes out of them. But for me, a home is like a sculpture. And when I think about Frank Lloyd Wright, how he handles space and how we walk through a space and how we feel in a space, I mean, that's a psychological feeling of walking into a space and walking into a ground. It has a certain kind of power.
Yeah.
It has a power to it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if this was something you actually saw,
Yes.
and how did you have your watercolors with you? I mean, what do you do?
I have sketch pads.
Okay.
I use camera research, but when I do something, I usually do sketches, and I work from the sketches. Because watercolor. Because people say something about me about detail. I said no, my watercolors are not really detail. It's an illusion. My work is pretty abstract. I'm really a very abstract, shape-oriented painter. I had a junior high school art teacher who told me that I saw very abstractly, and I couldn't make things very realistic, but he said I saw shapes very boldly. I said, well, Mr. Harris, I want to make things look like something. He said, well, you see abstractly. He said, you can learn technique later. He said, but to learn how to see abstractly, it's kind of hard to teach artists how to see abstractly, what to leave in, what to take out. And I'm as much as interested in the object I'm looking at as much as the space around it, because that's just as important when you start composing something. The way you place it in the composition makes a world of difference, how people's eye move around it.
And I think that's an interesting observation, because any of us, maybe anyone who's standing around, would see that, and like, you're right, we fill in the blanks.
Absolutely.
We fill in every little piece on the sagebrush, or we know a material, or even the cactus. You don't have to put in the little pokey things.
Absolutely.
Or whatever they're called. It's fine. It's there, the ridges through one color. Yeah, it's that essence
The
of
thing
it.
I like about watercolor too is I've heard artists say it's a very difficult medium, and it is, because when I first started working it was kind of a mess. But the thing of it is that once you learn it, there are things that happen while you're working. If you're working quickly and spontaneous, there's these sort of what I call spontaneous accidents, and that's what makes watercolor so thrilling. Is that, and I like going from a subtle, almost like if you were listening to music, like a violin, a very subtle thing, and then you get to this deep, dark shape, and boom, you get all this drama. If you look at it, it's very dramatic. It's very dramatic. There's this interesting space for your eye to travel into. There's another space, but then it's offset. These darks, and even the tree. If you feel the tree is very abstract. It's very airy and it's an abstraction.
And that's really, you can see that watercolor, the sort of bleeds there, and yeah. So you painted this actually in your studio in Florida.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So would you ever characterize yourself as a Western artist?
No, I don't. That's interesting, because when I first got invited to the shows in the West, I said, well, I'm not really a Western artist. And I said, well, because I was in Kansas City, but I was painting a lot of urban. I paint a lot of urban scenes and a lot of other types of things. But what I am interested in overall is the human condition.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, transcends anything type of category. I'm not interested in categories. I like abstract expressionist work. I like collages. I like art deco. I like all kinds of art. And to me, as a painter, if you look at a huge body of my work, I also do things that are totally non-objective. And so I do things that are totally abstract. And so I like combining the realism with the abstraction. And one of the things that I was really proud of, I was in a show at the Studio Harlem Museum, and one of the major critics there, Michael Kimmelman, came in and he reviewed the show, and he talked about the abstract quality of my work, and I was very thrilled about that, because a lot of times what happens with a lot of people is they get into just recognizing the subject, but they don't get into how the artist why it's an interesting
what makes one particular painting more interesting than another? When you look at, I was compared to Vermeer and some other painters, and how they use space. Yeah, not bad at all. And so, but the thing about it is, I think that for me, I like going to museums because you have all these different wings. You have all these abstract expressions. You have the impressionists, and I like all kinds of art. I'm not prejudiced. I even like installation things. So I'm an artist who I want to experience everything, because when I get back to my studio, sometimes some kind of way it starts weaving into my work, some kind of way. So
now, this is probably unfair because you've only just been to this museum.
Yes.
But was there anything in the Whitney that struck you that you admired, or I'm being kind of unfair. Is there any art here that you liked?
Yeah. There's I like a lot of the Remington things. I like a lot of different kinds of work for various reasons. There's something, even some of the beautiful mountain scenes by, was it Bierstadt? Bierstadt? Yeah, I mean, just the way they captured the atmosphere of the place, and even the way they used, even size-wise. I saw some of the studies and things, how they did their studies, how they did their preliminaries. I like seeing how the artist's mind works when they're looking at doing a work of art, because to me, everything is abstract, and a fine painter, just the way they compose and things, you know it.
Yeah.
You know it when you see it. There's a certain feeling that it gives you. It pulls you.
Yeah.
So I like I like all kinds of work. I can find. I mean, this museum is just rich in terms of history. I'm learning as I go through about the West, because like I said, I grew up in the South, but I'm having a deeper appreciation for the West in terms of just the Native American people. I have a series I've been working on the Pima Maricopa Reservation that I've been doing. I grew up in a very impoverished area, and those, for whatever reason, those reservations really spoke to me as a painter. And I understand that sensibility. It's not romantic, but it is a part of the West. It is a struggling part of the West, but it's a necessary part that we see. We are very familiar with the romantic, we're very familiar with the beauty. Now let's deal with some of the struggle. And some of these things are contemporary struggles, which is what I'm interested in. And then there are other buildings that that were, you could tell they were there for a long time, and they have a modern twist. You can see they knocked out part of it, now they put windows in it, and it's taken on a different thing. I have one painting called Aging in the Modern World, because they're now putting modern things in it, so it's taking on a whole different kind of feel to it. I'm interested in how people are still using things that have been left for them to use. I'm very interested in that. It's a lot of history in that.
Yeah.
So.
Now, do you have advice for aspiring artists?
Aspiring artist. Yeah, well, you know what? One of the joys that I've had being an artist, it has been more rewarding for me in terms of the people that I've met. The education that I have received has been enormously invaluable. I have tried to share that with my family, with any friends, because I've had my family members say, "Oh, I'm not interested in art. I don't care about art like that." I said, "Yes, you do. You know," I said, "everything's art." I said, it brings us peace, it brings us harmony. And if you look at, even with the struggles in any civilization, it is the art that brings us back and brings us closer to one another. And so, and even in that, even in my travel, I would have never had the rich education I've had. My work has given me more than I can say. It's just been so rich. The places I've been, the people I've met, the appreciation of just walking out and seeing something that's beautiful, and it doesn't take money for that. It's just rich in terms of looking at, nicely designed furniture, the textures, the craftsmanship. I was talking to a guy last night about the belt buckles and the craftsmanship that it goes into making the cowboy boots. That's an art form. And so for me, that's just rich. It's something that I'm trying to share with my children. I can't even express how, God, it's just been, I've had an amazing life. Amazing life, really.
So you would tell artists, go for it.
Go for it,
it's
because
an amazing life.
And I know the living part of it. I know the struggle in terms of getting people to appreciate your work. And I understand the making a living, because I'm telling you, I have heard it all. You can't, I mean, look, but you have to believe in what you're doing. And the one thing that I think that if you really believe in something hard enough, for whatever reason, the right people see you, there's that, and if you express your love for it, I think people are drawn to that. People are drawn to truth. Sometimes the truth is hard to deal with, to grapple with, but I've found myself in a better position. Like initially, sometimes there were certain paintings that wouldn't sell. People didn't want. They said, well, I don't know if I want it in my home, this or that. I had a painting that I did of one of my uncles who was dying of lung cancer. It is now in the Contemporary Museum of Contemporary Art. It was one of Crosby Kemper's finest paintings before he passed. And people say, you'll never sell it, you'll never sell it. Millions of people have seen that work, and I've gotten letters from people. You have to believe in what you're doing. I know money's important because we live in a capitalist society, but I think it's important that your soul is a part of that work, and the rest will follow. You just got to believe in it, you got to stick with it, and you got to get out and see other artists, you got to mingle, you have to, I mean, I grew up in a small town, and believe it or not, I was a shy guy. I didn't like to go to openings, and I'm still kind of like that. I am still like that. I did not like to go to openings, but I've learned how to, because I grew up in a small town and get to go places. Believe it or not, when you grow up poor and you're not exposed and your family wasn't able to take you anywhere, it's very intimidating. And the more I got known, I became more afraid of going anywhere. And it was a teacher who at the Columbus College of Art and Design and said, we see you in the magazines, the kids want to see you, they want to hear about your experiences. And I tell you, that first time I gave a lecture, I was sweating like crazy. I was so embarrassed. But the kids appreciate it because I was very honest with them. I said, look, I didn't have a car. I didn't have a car for 3 years. I got on buses with crates to take my stuff to the Greyhound bus station. I didn't have a car and all those things because it cost money. If I had to spend money on things like that, I wouldn't be able to enter the shows and the competitions. And so I dealt without a lot of things. So this was not an immediate gratification for me. This was a long journey. Here in this museum, it's been a long journey. But that's what makes it more rewarding. I have a serious appreciation for anybody who buys my work, which is why when I do a work, I rather it have some soul in it, because people work hard for their money. Sometimes whether they understand what they're getting or not, it's important that you give them the best. You give them the best of what you are, and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, I think that's the best advice I can give an artist.
Great advice.
You know.
Look, I know. I just want to hug you. Anything else?
Are there any specific artists that you felt really influenced your work?
Oh yeah, there's Franz Klein, there's Andrew Wyeth, there's there's just even a little bit of Robert Motherwell in my work. I can see the way, I'm interested in a lot of abstract painters that deal with negative space and all kinds of things. I like Richard Diebenkorn's work. There are so many different kinds of artists that I like. Degas, Rembrandt, use of light, Vermeer, of course. I could go Henry Oswald Tanner, Jacob Lawrence in terms of the way he designed. I have some things that are, particularly some of my inner city scenes that are very abstract and with color, a lot of color to them. So my work changes a lot. In fact, I had one show and they said, you got like 4 or 5 different styles there. Like, really? Oh, I didn't realize all that. I think, but that's what makes it fun. I like to keep it fun too. I like to keep it fun, but I'm also influenced by what I see on television. If there's something going on with the war, anything like that, I will incorporate some of those things into my work.
Having a couple of small children around.
Oh, you know what? The kids.
Anything?
Oh my God. You know what? I am. It's funny. I have become more serious about life, and I mean that in terms of what I'm doing as a painter. I've always been sort of serious about what I'm doing, but I've become even more serious because we live in a world that's that's highly volatile in terms of what we can do to one another as human beings. And so I try to take people, that's just why I like the intimacy of a world, to take people into a deep emotional part that may be disturbing to them, so they understand the sensibility about that. So when we have conflicts, that we're more sensitive about someone that we may not totally understand, but culturally we can go in through their window through art and learn about them, and we may be more sensitive in terms of listening to what each side has to say, because we all grow up in a different psychological space. And so to be able to deal with those psychological spaces, I think culture is a way to do that. And if you want to stop a lot of wars and a lot of things, we have to deal with people in a higher intellectual way. And I think that art is that window into people bridging those gaps and making a better world for our kids to be safer. And I think travel is very, very important. This is why culture is important, because this is our window into understanding different regions of the world. And it can be rich and it can be rewarding, and spiritually we can learn more about one another, how we're more alike than we are different, as Maya Angelou would say. We are truly more alike than we are different. And I think that art is coming into a time when art is more needed, more so than ever, because we now have the technology to basically annihilate things. And when I look at all the wildlife things that you have here at the museum, how some of these things are endangered, I think it's important that people understand the richness of those things and not take them for granted, that they're going to always be. And museums give you that window.
I don't know what else to do. The world according to Dean. Was there? Oh, one last question.
How long did that piece take you? And the process.
Probably a good. Oh, the process. Okay, I was going to say like 40, 50 years.
I know. I always think that should be the answer.
You know
to
what?
everything.
It's hard for me to say because I'm an artist who I will work on 5, 6 things at a time. Sometimes a watercolor can take 3, 4 hours, sometimes 20 minutes, depending on what it is, depending on my mood in the studio. Sometimes I'll work in oils first because the paint is heavier, it takes more energy, and then I'll jump to watercolor because my arms feel lighter. And I like to feel light when I'm doing watercolors because I like to move very swiftly with watercolors. I don't like to fuss with it. I like to, people think it's detailed, but sometimes it's just a matter of dragging the brush across the surface, slightly lifting it, or slightly pushing on the surface, heavy or not. And sometimes if there's a deep dark, I'm not afraid to use heavy color right away. Some artists say, oh, you got to go from light to dark. No, sometimes I'll go immediately right to dark and then to subtleties, depending on what it is and how I'm feeling. And I think that gives the work that freshness and that airiness that people like about watercolor. That was one of the things that I loved about John Singer Sargent's work. When I saw a show of his at I think it was at the National Gallery, I was so excited. A lot of times you know John Singer Sargent for his oils, but his watercolors, man, they were boom, boom, color. They were magical. It was just something.
I think that's interesting to go from oil to sort of warm up.
Yes.
Because so many people would think, oh, you do the sort of watercolor in the field, that's your study, and then you get serious with oil. So what an interesting way of heavy, light.
I actually like it, and for a while I used to work totally upright with watercolor, and you would have drips. There's some of my early painting with drips everywhere, and now I'm finding myself I'm actually standing over it more now. I'm actually standing. Sometimes I have it on a table, and I'm actually dropping paint. Sometimes, like in certain areas like this, I have a puddle of water and I have a spray bottle. I'm spraying, but I'm dropping paint, different colors in it, and I go, oh, that's not deep enough. And I have to grab another color and punch it down, and it spreads out like that. And next thing I got the illusion of a foliage of a tree, and it's just a matter of taking a sort of a brush with a very big brush with a fine point that I dip it into a dark, and then it's like a gesture drawing. It's like very quickly, not a lot of like this. It's very quick, and that's the spontaneity. And some parts I like slightly damp, so that you get sort of a nice soft edge to it, so it kind of breathes a little bit, so it's not as hard edged. And then some areas I want very soft, so you get this push and pull thing with it, with movement and a space. That's fun. Great
As
stuff.
like calligraphy.
Great.
Or
Yeah, it is.
handwriting.
That's exactly what it's
Yeah,
like.
that's what it reminds
And so you hear about these push and pulling of a space with something very crisp and then something very soft and airy, and it gives you that drama too, that dynamics that you like about watercolor. It's fun. Fun stuff. Fun stuff. Fun stuff.
So I'm sorry
That's
that we purchased this thing.
Fun stuff.
We have
Fun
a
stuff. Fun stuff. Yeah. Fun stuff. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Oh, sure, sure.
Steve, that was terrific.
I'm like, you know what? I'm like a kid when I start talking about art. Sometimes I'm giving lectures and they said, "What's he talking about?" I said, "Well, you know," I said, "Don't, you know," and I've taught watercolor too. And I see people that be all timid. I said, "No, just let it go." I was like, "Well, what are you worried about? The mistakes. Sometimes mistakes are beautiful. Like, you know, the drips and stuff. That's what makes it fun. You know, let it go." You know? I think that's how you learn how to. I think to learn how to master anything, there has to be a certain kind of freedom involved. You want it to look like it was easy, and that's the hardest thing to do with any medium, to make it look like it was easy. But it's also a mental thing, working in, you know, like sometimes when my mind is not clear, it's hard for me to work. But when I'm more relaxed and I'm at ease, that's when the magic happens. And sometimes you don't even realize sometimes I have music on and I'm just going, I don't even know, like, oh, this is, and it's just, it's just fun. It's great stuff. It's like, and to me, I think that's what's so magical about even with music. It's the same thing. You could hear somebody sing the same song, but it's not quite the same. And it could be the exact same words. Even a piano player, they could be a different. It's the touch. It's that touch. It's that. It may be a pause there somewhere that gives you that subtle magical part that may be missing. When do you pause? When do you not pause? It's the same thing in painting. When do I push the brush closer to the surface? When do I pull it away so it gives you room to breathe? You know, it's a different kind of sensibility when you're painting. It's like when you're in the moment. It's a wonderful thing. To be creative is a wonderful thing. I love being creative, and I love creative people, and I think that it makes the world livable for us all. The creativity makes it livable for us all. I mean, I just love art. Just love it.
Me too.
Love it. You too. I love it. I love being an artist. I mean, you know, my mom is like, and my mom is so, my family, you'll believe it or not, my mom and my family, they just can't believe how well I've done in terms of my, you know, selling and all that. But for me, it's a lot more than selling. It's also, you know, a legacy in some ways. What have I left behind that will better the human condition? What have I left behind that will make people better human beings? That's what I'm about as an artist. You know, in fact, I sometimes get a little disturbed by there's certain politics with art. You're like, people will say, oh, well, I remember somebody asked me, I went to a show and this guy, his collection was touring. It was an African-American collection. And it was coming out of Los Angeles. I said, oh, I'm going to show in Los Angeles. He said, you are? I said, yeah. I said, he said, where at? I said, at the Archery. He said, the Western Museum? This was an African-American guy whose collection was touring. He said, what kind of art do you do? You know? And so I thought that was very interesting how sometimes people see you because of your nationality and they think, well, what? You're in a Western Museum? What kind of? I said, well, it's all about, you know, it's all about the human experience. That's what it's about.